and gentlemen. In conformity with the relevant provisions of the 1999 Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, the Electoral Act of 2022, and the Independent National Electoral Commission's regulations and guidelines for the conduct of elections, the Nigerian electorate were called to the polls on the 25th February 2023 to elect the next president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria and members of the National Assembly. Pursuant to the provisions of the Ecowa Supplementary Protocol on Democracy and Good Governance 2001, His Excellency Dr. Umar Aliyu Toure, President of the Commission of the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, deployed an Election Observation Mission, EOM, to the Presidential and National Assembly elections in the Federal Republic of Nigeria as part of the ECOWAS support to the consolidation of democratic process in the country. The EOM was led by myself, Ernest Baikoroma, former President of the Republic of Sierra Leone, and deputized by His Excellency Baba Kamara, former National Security Advisor of the Republic of Ghana. The EOM also comprised officials from the Ministries of Foreign Affairs of ECOWAS member states, experts from the Electoral Commission of ECOWAS member states, delegations of the ECOWAS Parliament, the Community Court of Justice, and the ECOWAS Council of the Wise. Ambassadors of ECOWAS member states accredited to ECOWAS, media experts, and members of the civil society. The Commission was supported by a technical team from the ECOWAS Commission led by Ambassador Abdel Fattah Musa, Commissioner for Political Affairs, Peace and Security. Commitments and support to the electoral process. In keeping with the provisions of Article 42(2) and 44(b) of the 1999 ECOWAS Protocol relating to the mechanism for conflict prevention, management and resolution, peacekeeping and security, Article 12 of the 2001 Supplementary Protocol on Democracy, Good Governance, and Article 53C of the 2008 ECOWAS Conflict Prevention Framework, the ECOWAS Commission deployed a pre-election fact-finding mission to the 6 geopolitical zones of the Federal Republic of Nigeria from the 23rd October to the 12th November 2022. ECOWAS followed up on most of the recommendations made by the pre-electoral fact-finding mission to ensure their implementation by the concerned Nigerian institutions and stakeholders. In this regard, ECOWAS organized dialogue and mediation training sessions and consultative engagements on non-violent elections for political actors and relevant stakeholders from November 2022 to January 2023 across the 6 geopolitical zones as tools for preventing and mitigating election-related conflicts and disputes. To effectively monitor and observe the presidential elections and the National Assembly elections, the Ecowa Commission deployed a core team of 13 experts, 12 long-term and 250 short-term observers to cover pre-election, election day, and post-election phases in the 6 geopolitical zones. Electoral campaigns, security, and the media. The mission took note of the signing of 2 peace accords by all the political parties and their candidates. The first on the 29th September 2022 and the second on the 22nd February 2023 to enlist their commitment to a peaceful conduct of the 2023 general elections. The electoral campaigns took place in all the geopolitical zones in a peaceful and conducive atmosphere. The political parties and their candidates actively carried out their campaigns and had the opportunity to disseminate their manifestos and programs to the electorate. The main method of campaign was through street rallies and town hall meetings based on agreed schedules among the political parties and candidates. The mission notes that security protection was provided for all the presidential candidates during the campaigns and throughout the electoral process. The mission notes the high level of citizens' mobilization, advocacy, and sensitization carried out by civil society to promote a conducive environment for credible, inclusive, and violence-free elections. The mission also notes the vibrant media landscape, animated by more than 300 newspapers, 108 magazines, 300 radio stations, and 125 television stations across the country. The major radio and television stations with greater national reach are based in Abuja and Lagos. Pre-election consultations, deployment, and observations. Consultations. Upon my arrival in the Federal Republic of Nigeria on the 21st February 2023, I held consultations with His Excellency, the Nigerian Foreign Affairs Minister, the Chief of Defense Staff, General Abubakar Salami, Chairman of the National Peace Committee, and Professor Mahmoud Yakubu, the Chairman of the Independent National Electoral Commission, as well as major civil society coalitions. I also met with candidates and representatives of the political parties competing in the elections. In addition, I held consultations before and after the elections with head of election observation missions of the African Union, led by His Excellency Uhuru Kenyatta, former President of the Republic of Kenya, the West African Elders Forum, led by His Excellency John Mahama, former President of the Republic of Ghana, and the Commonwealth, led by His Excellency Thabo Mbeki, former President of the Republic of South Africa, and Her Excellency Joyce Banda, former President of Malawi, heading the NDI and the IRR. We also met the electoral management bodies of the Ecowa's network of Electoral Commission, ECONEC, the European Union, and had discussions with the acting special representative of the Secretary General and officer in charge of the United Nations Office for West Africa and the Sahel, UNOAS, and a cross-section of African ambassadors accredited to Nigeria. Following these consultations, I encouraged the Independent National Electoral Commission to ensure the conduct of a free, fair, and credible elections, urge the political parties and candidates to enhance their voter sensitization and mobilization campaign, and encourage the Nigerian citizens to come out on election day to fulfill their civic duty. In line with his preventive diplomacy mandate, the President of the ECOWAS Commission, His Excellency Umar Aliyu Toure, addressed a solidarity message to the Nigerian population and concerned stakeholders in the electoral process on the eve of the elections, encouraging them to ensure the conduct of a credible and a peaceful polls. Deployment. Following a pre-deployment briefing session organized by the ECOWAS technical team, the 250 short-term observers were deployed to 6 geopolitical zones of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, namely the Northwest, Northeast, North Central, Southwest, Southeast, South-South, and the Federal Capital Territory, Abuja. Opening conduct of election and vote counting. After a careful analysis of the information received from observers deployed in the field, the mission notes the following. The late start of voting beyond the 8:30 a.m. opening time due to the late arrival of polling officials, voting materials, and in some cases, the delivery of wrong materials at polling stations across the country. There were postponements of elections in some polling units in Lagos, Imo, Bayelsa, Rivers, and Edo states due to electoral violence or logistical challenges. The availability in relatively sufficient quantities, the electoral materials in all the polling stations across the country. The visible presence of security agents discharging their duties in accordance with the provisions of the law in some polling units. However, they were inadequate. The professional conduct of polling officials, as well as some ad hoc staff who demonstrated inadequate knowledge of their duties, especially with the voting materials. The agents of major political parties, the All People's Congress, the All Progressive Party, the APC, the People's Democratic Party, the Labour Party, and the New Nigeria People's Party were present in most of the polling stations. There is a visible absence of most of the other party agents in the rest of the stations. There was the use of indelible ink to indicate that a voter had cast their vote. Some polling units ran out of the ink, delaying the resumption of voting. All voters were requested to present their permanent voter cards, PVC, and were accredited by the Bimodal Voter Accreditation System, BVAS, before they were allowed to vote at all the polling stations observed. Priority was given to vulnerable persons, including the elderly, women, nursing mothers, and necessary assistance was accorded to persons with disability to enable them cast their ballots. The setup of most of the polling units visited did not adequately protect the secrecy of the voting process. The presence of international observers from the AU, the European Union, the Commonwealth, the British High Commission, NDI, RII, and other local observers in the missions was observed in the polling stations. Voter turnout was generally low in most of the polling stations visited. Polls closed in most of the polling stations visited as stipulated by INEC at 2:30 p.m. Prospective voters on the queue at 2:30 p.m. were allowed to exercise their franchise. Vote count and tallying were carried out in a transparent, simple, and professional manner in the presence of party agents, observers, and security agents at daytime in some polling units and with lamps in others where voting was delayed. However, the collation sequence differed from polling station to polling station. The total vote cast was recorded in some polling units, while in others the total votes were calculated as a total of the vote cast for each party or candidate and invalid votes at the end of the tabulation. This, however, did not lead to any major challenges. There was cooperative and non-adversarial relationship between the electoral officials and party agents, which facilitated easy and efficient conduct of elections. There were cases of BVAS failure to accredit voters due mainly to technical issues relating to login details, configuration, or internet connectivity. Incidents. The processes on E-Day, the election day, unfolded in a generally peaceful environment. However, incidents of violence, killings, and disruptions were recorded in several states. The mission deplores the unfortunate incidents that occurred in the lead-up to the election day, resulting in the loss of life in some parts of the countries. This included the murder of the Labour Party senatorial candidate for the Enugu East Senatorial District, along 5 of his supporters, and the 3 persons who lost their lives in Kano in clashes between supporters of 2 major rival political parties, the APC and the NNPP. On election day, an attack perpetrated by the Boko Haram insurgents in Gwaza local government area in Borno state resulted in 5 persons injured. Similarly, there were reported attacks by bandits in Alawa, Shiroro local government areas in Niger. Violent incidents were likewise recorded in Mofuluku areas of Oshodi in Lagos State, where masked men armed with pump-action rifles disrupted voting and burnt ballot papers and boxes. There were also reported cases of ballot snatching and beavers theft in some states, including Delta, Katsina, and Anambra. Specifically, an incident was recorded in Osholimi local government area of Delta, where thugs attacked a polling unit. In the process, fled with 2 beavers machines. Similarly, in Safana local government area, Katsina State, thugs attacked a voting center and snatched 6 beavers machines. However, while few beavers machines were recovered by the security forces, INEC's contingency arrangements enabled continuation of voting as stolen beavers machines were replaced and security was reinforced in the areas affected. The mission presents its sincere condolences to the families of the victims. The mission notes the increasing misinformation and disinformation on social media, including misleading conjectures and projections regarding the outcome of the 25th February 2023 general elections, liable to cause disaffection and inflame tension in the polity. It urges the public to disregard the provocations and continue to rely on official pronouncements of the electoral process by INEC and other competent national institutions. The observations detailed herein cover events in the lead-up to the election day and the voting process on the election day. Ecowa's election observation mission will continue to observe the concluding phases of the electoral process, engage stakeholders where necessary and in line with its preventive diplomacy mandate, and make additional observations if needed. It shall in due course compile a comprehensive report of its findings, including best practices and shortcomings observed, as well as incidents in precise polling units, locations, and numbers to concerned stakeholders in the Nigerian electoral system for the consolidation of remedial action. To that end, Ecowas shall engage the concerned stakeholders. Conclusion. The Ecowas Electoral Commission Observation Mission commends His Excellency Muhammadu Buhari, President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, and the legislative bodies of Nigeria for the measures taken to include the adoption of the new Electoral Act that strengthened the autonomy and freedom of action of INEC and ensured greater transparency and inclusivity in the electoral process. The mission, however, implores the authorities to apply adequate mitigating measures in implementing the major decisions during the electoral period, such as the monetary measures being currently implemented in order to ease the burden of citizen participation in the electoral process. The mission commends INEC for the measures taken to improve the level of confidence of the electorate in the elections and its proactive communication and interventions to resolve challenges in real time on the election day. The mission, however, noted that the logistics delay in the commencement of the voting process in some of the polling stations, as well as some technical challenges experienced with the BVAS machines, affected the efficiency of the process in some areas. The mission commends the speed and transparency in the collation of electoral results and urges INEC to ensure prompt transmission and declaration of the provisional results. The mission applauds the resilience, patience, determination, and commitment of the electorate to the democratic consolidation throughout the electoral process. In particular, the mission salutes the enthusiasm and commitment of the youth to contribute effectively to the democratic consolidation through their active engagement in the process. In the same vein, the mission applauds the professionalism of the security forces and all the stakeholders involved in the management of the electoral process and salutes the great political maturity that the Nigerian citizens displayed throughout the process. The mission, in the meantime, wishes to make the following recommendations. To INEC, intensify and increase the frequency of communication on developments regarding the electoral process to the general public and promptly share information in order to discourage misinformation through social media and other means. Ensure an ongoing training of technical and ad hoc staff to professionally handle, resolve issues related to the use of the BVAS machines. Review the system of uploading results in real time. Enhance communication on the voting, collation, and process. To the political parties, enhance human participation in the electoral process. including by encouraging champions in the advocacy by party members for the enhanced and meaningful roles of party members. Ensure continuous training on civic education for their members for peaceful elections. Encourage members and followers to desist from the use of inflammatory utterances and acts liable to incite violence in the post-electoral phase. Urge the candidates in the presidential elections to respect the outcome of the elections, as will be announced by INEC, and to resort, if the need arises, to exclusively legal channels to resolve electoral disputes. The ECOWA's observer mission, through the core team, the long-term observers, and the technical team of the ECOWAS Commission, will continue to monitor post-electoral developments and recommend mitigating measures where needed. It expresses appreciation to the competent authorities of the Federal Republic of Nigeria for the measures taken to facilitate the deployment of the observers for the elections of the 25th February 2023, done in Abuja this 27th day of February 2023. I thank you very much.
To present the preliminary report of the African Union on the ongoing elections here in Nigeria. And I will begin by going straight to the point and saying that the people of the Federal Republic of Nigeria went to the polls on the 25th of February 2023 to elect their president and members of the Senate and National Assembly. This was the 7th successive general election since the return to multi-party democracy in 1999. The chairperson of the African Union deployed an election observation mission led by myself, Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta, former President of the Republic of Kenya. And the short-term observation mission comprised nearly 90 observers drawn from 32 AU member states and was supported by a 5-member experts team. The mission had been preceded by a special pre-election political mission that took place in December of 2022. The main objective of the mission is to promote peaceful, democratic, credible elections in Nigeria through an independent and impartial assessment of the electoral process in line with the 2007 African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance and the 2012 OAU-AU Declaration of Principles Governing Democratic Elections in Africa, as well as our Agenda 2063. The mission has engaged with key stakeholders, including the Independent National Electoral Commission, the Chief Justice, security agencies, the National Peace Committee, presidential candidates, the African Group of Ambassadors accredited to Nigeria, international election observers, civil society organizations, and the media, amongst others. Through this preliminary statement, the mission offers a summary of its key findings and recommendations on the electoral process up to the closing and counting of the polls. And I want to emphasize this, for this statement is issued while the collation of election results is still ongoing, and the mission will therefore continue to closely follow the electoral process and provide a detailed final report at a later stage. Preliminary findings. The context of the election. The 25th February 2023 elections offered Nigeria an opportunity to consolidate her democracy, peace, and stability at the end of incumbent President Muhammadu Buhari's second and final term in office. The electoral environment was generally peaceful, despite isolated incidents of violence, and the polls took place against the backdrop of a cash crisis following the redesigning of the Naira currency, while a range of stakeholders acknowledged this in a positive spirit and supported the policy of the Naira redesign. The mission noted that the timing of its implementation impacted on the economy as well as the logistical operations of INEC, the campaign process, and the conduct of election observation, amongst others. Significant progressive reforms were a key feature of the 2023 general elections. Some of the reforms were a result of recommendations made in previous AU observation missions. The mission therefore commends Nigeria's continuous commitment to consolidate its democratic governance. The legal framework. Among the key reforms in the Electoral Act of 2022 include the conduct of early primaries by political parties, technological innovation, such as the bimodal voter accreditation system, BVAS, the INEC results viewing portal, timely disbursement of funds to INEC, and the power by INEC to review results. Other reforms include enhanced inclusion of special categories of the electorate, which encouraged fair political competition and accountability in the electoral process. The mission therefore commends these positive developments, which are aligned with Nigeria's international, continental, as well as regional obligations. The mission commends INEC on the progressive measures taken to promote greater participation in the electoral process, including giving priority to the elderly, persons living with disabilities, and other marginalized groups. The 2022 Electoral Act, for example, introduced a magnifying lens for the visually impaired, braille ballots for the blind, and specially designed posters describing the voting process for the deaf. The mission further notes that sections 15 and 42 of the Nigerian Constitution guarantees equal rights for men and women in political, social, and economic life. However, the first past the post electoral system does not seem to encourage affirmative action for women, youth, and persons living with disabilities. There were notably very low number of candidates from these categories. For instance, there was only one female candidate at presidential level, and only 8.4% and 9.2% of the candidates were female for the senatorial and House representative levels, respectively. In a different vein, the mission notes that there are no legal provisions to allow for special voting for INEC staff, security personnel deployed to work away from their respective registered polling unit on election day. This leaves out over 1 million people who are left disenfranchised. Voter registration. INEC registered 93,469,008 voters, of which 47.5 were women, and this marked an 11% increase from the 84 million voters recorded in the 2019 general election. The mission therefore applauds INEC's decentralization strategy for permanent voter card collection to its 8,809 registration areas wards. This special measure increased the PVC collection rate as compared to 2019. Election campaigns. The mission noted that the political parties contesting the general elections committed to a peaceful electoral process through signing of peace accords, and the campaign period was generally peaceful, albeit with incidents of violence reported. The media environment. The mission noted that the media played a key role in disseminating information aimed at promoting meaningful participation during elections. Both public and private media outlets enjoyed a relative confidence and trust of stakeholders during the electoral period. Social media platforms were extensively used for campaign. The mission, however, noted with concern the extent of disinformation, misinformation, fake news, hate speech, mainly conveyed via social media platforms. The security environment. The election took place amidst general insecurity in the Northwest, the Northeast, the Southeast, and South-South geopolitical zones. The mission noted that the security issues presented a challenge to the conduct of the elections, as noted with the attack on INEC offices, personnel, and materials before the election. The Nigerian police force reported that it had mobilized about 310,973 personnel to provide security during the elections. The mission took note of the complementary deployment of the Nigerian military and paramilitary units across the Federation to avert threats to violence that could impact the peaceful conduct of elections. the role of civil society and election observers. The mission commends the active role played by civil society, including women and youth organizations, in championing democracy, for electoral reform, civic and voter education, peace initiatives, and election observation. INEC accredited 196 citizen observer groups and 33 international organizations who collectively played a significant role in safeguarding the integrity of the electoral process. The mission commends INEC for accrediting the largest contingent of election observers in the 2023 elections since Nigeria's return to multi-party democracy. Election Day observations. The mission deployed 32 teams of observers in 17 states, covering all 6 geopolitical zones. The observers visited a total of 438 polling units to observe the opening, voting, closing, and counting procedures in both urban and rural areas. In 95% of the polling units visited, the atmosphere was generally calm and peaceful, except for isolated incidents of violence in Kano, Lagos, Delta, Abuja, and Cross River. The mission notes with regret the loss of life as well as damage to property occasioned by these incidents. The mission also takes note of the positive measures undertaken by INEC to reschedule polls to 26 February 2023 in specific areas where voting could not take place due to insecurity or logistical reasons. Opening of polling. 83% of the polling units visited opened late. The average delay was over an hour, and in some cases, they opened as late as 11 a.m. This was largely due to the late arrival of polling officials and materials, as well as slow setup in some of the polling units. Accessibility. While most of the polling units were generally accessible to voters, in 16% of the units, there were difficulties in accessibility for people with disabilities, particularly those facing mobility challenges. Transparency of the process. Voting and counting took place in an open and transparent atmosphere in the presence of observers, party agents, and media, though in some instances, ballot boxes lacked the relevant seals. Voting process. Election procedures designated 8:30 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. as the voting time. 6 hours do not provide sufficient voting time frame considering the huge voter population in Nigeria, the largest democracy in Africa, and in many cases witnessed by the AU observers, voting time had to be extended several hours beyond the 2:30 official closing time due to significantly large number of voters on the queue. The mission noted that voting proceeded uninterrupted throughout the day in most polling units observed, except in a few cases in Abuja, Kano, and Lagos. There were well-controlled queues at 81% of the polling units visited. The mission also noted the unbalanced allocation of voters per polling unit. When INEC had capped 750 as a ceiling for voters per polling unit, the allocation of voters ranged from 116 to 3,000 in some polling units. This had several implications on the process, including straining some polling staff who had to manage a large number of voters. Furthermore, the disparity of voter allocation affects optimal utilization of INEC resources, particularly in polling units with minimal voters. The mission commends the innovation of using BVAS technology to accredit voters. This enhanced the credibility of the process in 94% of the polling units visited. The BVAS functioned successfully. In some cases, however, the mission observed that the process was delayed due to the limited number of BVAS compared to the large number of voters allocated to a polling unit, which created frustrations among the voters who had to wait longer in the queues. Counting and closing. Most polling units observed did not close on time, that is 2:30. The mission noted that voters in the queue at closing time were allowed to cast their votes, and counting took place in an open and transparent environment. The AU observers noted that some voters had cast their ballot, in the wrong ballot box, and this could be attributed to the mismatch between the color marking of the ballot boxes and the color of the ballot papers. Polling personnel. Polling personnel were generally competent in carrying out their duties and demonstrated a sense of commitment, except in a few cases where some polling officers did not know how to effectively use the BVAS machine. In other cases, they were slow in operationalizing the opening of polls. The mission, however, commends INEC for deploying women and youth as polling officials. Conclusion and preliminary recommendations. The 25th of February 2023 election was crucial in consolidating democracy, peace, and stability in Nigeria. The commitment by the incumbent president to respect the term limits and support a peaceful and democratic political transition is laudable as it continues to entrench constitutionalism and democratic governance. The mission noted that despite the challenging economic, operational, and security environment, the elections were generally well administered in a transparent and peaceful atmosphere amidst significant challenge posed by the cash crisis and the volatile security context in some areas. And while the mission noted a generally low voter turnout in polling units visited, the people of Nigeria demonstrated enthusiasm, resilience in exercising their democratic right to elect leaders of their choice. As the country awaits the announcement of results by INEC, the mission urges all stakeholders to remain committed to the rule of law and democratic principles until the conclusion of the process. The mission further encourages any aggrieved party to use legally established channels to seek recourse. The mission further prefers the following preliminary recommendations for consideration in improving future electoral processes. To the government of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, firstly, uphold peace and the rule of law throughout the electoral process. To explore the implications of the timing of policy implementation of the Naira redesign on the electoral process in order to adopt corrective measures in future. And through a multi-stakeholder approach, consider measures for affirmative action in the electoral system for women, people with disabilities, and youth. Such measures could include consideration for special seats through a quota system, amongst others. To the Independent National Electoral Commission, recommend review of the electoral logistics operations strategy to ensure timely deployment of electoral material and personnel and sufficient capacity building. To review voting time with a view to increasing it beyond the currently designated 6 hours of 8:30 a.m. to 2:30 p.m., and it is anticipated that such an amendment will encourage greater participation. To consider necessary measures to allow for voting for election officials and essential workers that may be on duty during polling days. To review the allocation of voters per polling unit as a way to ensure that it is equitable. To consider a more user-friendly way to help voters to identify their respective polling units, and to regulate the number of BVAS machines deployed at each polling unit to match the allocation of voters per unit, to strengthen measures to enhance accessibility to polling units, especially for people requiring special assistance, to sustain efforts to regularly communicate with stakeholders throughout the electoral process, and to review the color marking of ballot papers to ensure that they are consistent with the color marking of the ballot boxes to minimize confusion of voters. The AU will, at the end of the process, be issuing a much more detailed report once the coalition or the collating process is complete. We urge all Nigerians to remain calm and to await upon the final verdict of INEC. I thank you.
Non-sensitive materials, as well as preparations by local security agencies. On the 25th of February, the observers visited polling stations to observe the opening, accreditation, voting, counting, and collation of the results, following which they returned to Abuja for debriefing and preparation of our final report. Our preliminary findings will be shared in the following manner. We'll first provide our key findings on the pre-election environment, after which the pre-election environment, as Africa's largest democracy and a valued member of the Commonwealth, the eyes of the continent, the world, have indeed been on Nigeria. It is noteworthy that there was a marked increase in the number of registered voters from the previous election, from 84 million in 2019 to more than 93 million voters. It is noted that these elections took place following the enactment of a new electoral law signed into law exactly a year prior to the conduct of these elections. Important amendments include funds for the elections that have been disbursed to INEC a year in advance of the elections, the requirement for political parties to advance their primaries much earlier, to allow INEC to effect better planning in advance of elections, and legal backing for the use of electronic accreditation of voters and digital results transmission and assistance to people with disabilities, among others. We welcome the signing of the National Peace Accord on the 22nd of February by all political parties shortly before the elections, which was witnessed by the Commonwealth Secretary General and other leaders. We note incidences of election-related violence and insecurity, some of which regrettably resulted in the loss of life and the postponement of elections in some polling units. We also observed that these elections took place amidst a naira, a demonetization policy, and fuel scarcity. This notwithstanding, we observed that election day proceeded largely peacefully. The determination, patience, and resilience of all of those Nigerians who turned out to vote in these elections are to be highly commended. We note that there was only one woman presidential candidate out of a total of 18. While there has been concerted efforts to advance progress in increasing women's political participation as candidates since the 2019 elections, including the tabling of a private members' bill in Parliament to promote gender equality, we note that this bill was not passed. The vibrant participation by the youth in these elections was evident, especially in campaigns and on social media. We observed the significant role of the youth as INEC officials. We note that the campaign was vibrant and colorful, with the adoption of robust campaign methods, including numerous billboards, posters, and large, very well-attended rallies, as well as active social media campaigns. We welcome the role played by the media in covering the elections, but also note several challenges which were reported to the observers, including concerns about the safety of the journalists, disinformation, and incidents of hate speech on social media. On election day observations, our observers noted significant delays in the opening of polls in most of the polling units observed, which impacted on pre-poll procedures. In some instances, polling officials arrived late at their designated polling units, while in others, there were gaps observed in the timely supply and delivery of essential materials. We also noted that polling staff, security personnel, and other essential workers deployed on election day were unable to vote and were therefore disenfranchised from the process. And on the role of polling staff and the polling procedures, the polling staff conducted their duties transparently, although in some cases there were inconsistencies in applied procedures. At some polling units, voters were encouraged to check their names on the voters register before they could join the queue to avoid being turned away from being at the wrong polling unit. And this was commendable. On the matter of the use of technology, while the bimodal voter accreditation system, BVAS, functions satisfactorily in most polling units, our observers reported that the BVAS was faster on facial recognition than on detecting fingerprints of the voters during the accreditation process.